Thursday, February 8th. Appreciate everybody being here. Committee, we don't have any minutes, no bill hearings. We're not going to work anything. We're just going to jump right into the hearing. And a little bit different on the schedule is that our neutral is going to go first, because our neutral who's on WebEx is going to just kind of give us the lay of the land a little bit and explain to us a little bit of information about this topic before we jump into the mostly proponent testimony. So I will open the hearing on House Bill 2676 and have our revisor give us an overview. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2676 adds additional conduct that constitutes the crime of assisting suicide, and then it provides criminal penalties for violation of those new elements. The bill amends KSA 215407, that's the crime of assisting suicide. Current law there in subsection A2 cap A creates a way to commit the crime by intentionally assisting another person to commit or attempt to commit suicide by providing the physical means by which another person commits or attempts to commit suicide. This bill would add that providing knowledge about the physical means by which another person commits or attempts to commit suicide would also violate that provision. And then the bill adds 3 additional ways to commit the crime. The first is communicating with another person with the intent to exercise substantial control over such person, using such person's fears, affections, or sympathies to cause such person to commit or attempt to commit suicide. That version would be a severity level 5 person felony. The second additional way to commit the crime would be knowingly exerting undue influence over another person with the intent to cause such person to commit or attempt to commit suicide. That would be a severity level 4 person felony. And then finally, the third additional way to commit the crime would be intentionally coercing or encouraging another person to commit or attempt to commit suicide. And that again would be a severity level 4 person felony. And I can take any questions.
Thank you, committee. Do you have any questions for Natalie? Natalie, I do just, okay, I see. So that's a severity 4. Okay, got it. I see where you added that in the, I'm looking at the bill and I see where that was. Okay. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It looks to me like describing how to commit suicide in the abstract, posting it on your website, talking generally in this committee that yes, you can put a hose from your tailpipe into the passenger compartment. That doesn't appear to be prohibited. But if I'm telling someone who's contemplating suicide that you can put a hose from your tailpipe into the passenger compartment, turn on the vehicle, and commit suicide, that seems to be the prohibited conduct. Am I following this?
Madam Chair, Representative Carmichael, can you please clarify? Are you talking about the first change on line 13 there? The to the existing element. So in order to meet that element of the crime, you have to first be intentionally assisting another person to commit or attempt to commit suicide by providing the physical means or knowledge about the physical means. So that one requires an intent element that you're, maybe that person has come to you and said they want to commit suicide, and now you're
right. And if I understand, bear with me, Madam Chair, if there's a particular person involved who has the intent to take their life, that's prohibited to tell them how to do it, even if you don't provide the materials or actually help in accomplishing their purpose.
Madam Chair, Representative Carmichael, I don't know that would be prohibited under current law, but I think that's what this provision is.
Yes, I meant under the bill. But if on the other hand, I write a new book that says I think people ought to be able to die with dignity and end their life on their own terms before they die a horrible death from Lou Gehrig's disease, and here's how to do it, That does not appear to be prohibited, at least as I read this bill, but I may be wrong because it's not directed to one. It's directed to hundreds or thousands of people about how to commit suicide.
Madam Chair, Representative Carmichael, yeah, unless a prosecutor was able to prove that you were intentionally assisting another person to commit suicide by publishing that book, that's the intent element that would be required.
What I'm failing to articulate or understand, and it's my fault, is if I publish it for the world at large, I know that there are people somewhere that are going to read that book and they may end their life with the technique that I described for them. That's a general intent to inform the public how to end your life. I'm just trying to figure out, is that sufficient to be a violation, or does it have to be, I know Natalie Scott is about to commit suicide. Here's my book. Do you understand?
Sure.
Can you help me with that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Carmichael, if I could predict what juries and judges would doing, I think I could make a lot more money doing something else. But I can't.
I'm not on a motion to dismiss because the facts are insufficient to support a charge under what would be an amended statute.
Yeah, I mean, it's all going to be very fact specific, whether a prosecutor is able to prove that the person writing that book had the requisite intent that's required. We have three types of culpable mental state here. We have knowledge, recklessness, and intentional. And so this one is the highest level of intent would be required. And so, I think it would really depend on some of the circumstances. But
I don't want to take any more of the committee's time. I haven't come to a good conclusion in my mind as to whether a general intent to provide instructions on how to commit suicide, general intent without it directed toward a specific person, would be sufficient to violate the law if this bill were to become law. That's what I'm having trouble with, Madam Chair. And that's in part because of constitutional concerns.
Thank you. Representative Heiberger, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Natalie, would it be possible for you to summarize the difference between this bill and the bill we heard last week? And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's fine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Heiberger, I actually brought the other bill up here with me so I could try to walk you guys through the differences in case that came up. So House Bill 2488, which you guys heard previously, both of those new additional elements are intentional elements. So like I talked about those three types of culpable mental state, we're talking about the highest culpable mental state. The two new elements were intentionally advising or encouraging another person to commit suicide that causes that person to go through with that, or just intentionally advising or encouraging, and maybe ultimately the person doesn't go through with that. So that's the advising and encouraging is the big takeaway from House Bill 2488. In House Bill 2676, we do have what I would say maybe a similar element there, which is subsection A5, starting at line 23, intentionally coercing or encouraging another person to commit suicide or attempt to commit suicide. And then the other two are pretty unique to this bill, the communicating with another person with the intent to exercise control, and then the knowingly exerting undue influence over another person with the intent to cause them to commit or attempt to commit suicide.
So the intentionality element is not there for encouraging in the other bill, is that correct? Or is it in another section?
Madam Chair, Representative Heiberger, in House Bill 2488, they're both intentional. You have to be intentionally advising them and they follow through, or intentionally advising and they don't follow through.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, do you have any other questions? Yes, Representative Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess this is along the same lines as Representative Carmichael's concerns, less about intent and more about the specific circumstances, though. So in Section 3, we have the term exercise substantial control, and number 4 includes undue influence. Especially with undue influence, I'm curious how we would define those terms if if a prosecutor were to try and use this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Titus, those terms aren't defined. So that, that's going to be up to a prosecutor to prove that they did, whatever they did over the person was actually exerting undue influence. And then a jury is going to have to believe that it was undue, but there's no definition proposed to be used.
So this would be the highest evidentiary standard then, since this is criminal.
Yeah, so it would have to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah.
Committee, any other questions? Representative Mon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just this, not so much of a, I guess I'll make it into question. So undue influence, is that described in PIC somewhere? I'm pretty sure that there has to be some, because it's not an uncommon term in criminal law. And so, and if you know, I mean, I don't, in PIC for the non-lawyers patent jury instructions, but I don't recall them all myself, but
Madam Chair, Representative Mon, I would have to look at that. Of course, every time we create a new crime, the PIC committee of the Judicial Council gets together and decides what jury instructions are going to be given, depending on what the charge would be. So I'd have to see if there is a specific one that kind of describes undue influence, but either me or someone from research, I'm sure could find that out for you.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, committee, so thank you, Natalie. Before we start, I know a lot of you have been on corrections or about it, and with the maybe hesitation of bringing up a sore subject, I have a prop, but we can do that in committee. I don't know if you all have the sentencing grid, like handy. I just think it's super helpful because we're often looking at bills and they are talking about it says severity level 3. It's this, it's person, non person, it's drug, non drug. I hope you have one of these handy, all of you. So yes, I'm looking over at Representative Smith. Do you have one? Yes, awesome. Anyway, yes, Representative. Okay. Anyway, yes. The Sentencing Commission makes these, and I know they would be happy. And I think it's very helpful if we have them handy. And Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think, along the line of questioning with Representative Carmichael and Representative Titus is that since this bill was drafted and starting to look at some case law across the country where states have these, have laws on the books for this and have actually prosecuted cases and won, there is probably some better wording that needs to be used that has actually held up in court. So I'm more than welcome to listen to that. I'm not an attorney. I don't want to be an attorney. I just play one in here. That's all I do.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful and good for us to keep in mind. Representative Carmichael.
One brief bite at the apple. It's always a good day when Representative Landwehr and I agree. Okay, and there's some things there's some things in your bill as well as the prior bill that I think we're going to agree upon. But I think what we have to focus on, in part at least, is the constitutional concept of void for vagueness. If we don't define what conduct is prohibited, then the public doesn't have ample knowledge of what is prohibited and what is allowed. For example, the book salesperson who sells the book to somebody who says, I'm having a bad day, I think I'm going to end it. Is that prohibited? We've got to work through these things because in the end, I want to get protection to keep straight kids, queer kids, adults, everybody, protection from being bullied into committing suicide.
Thank you. Committee, any other comments before we start? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was a question that I thought of after the sentencing grid, but I was curious, how does the sentencing in this bill compare to 2488? Are they the same?
Natalie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me those. So in this, in House Bill 2676, the bill you're hearing today, the 3 additional elements are either severity level 5 or severity level 4 person felonies. So the communicating with another with the intent, that one is a severity level 5. And then the other 2, paragraphs 4 and 5, are severity level 4. Now, remember, our severity levels go 1 being the most serious, 10 being the least serious. In House Bill 2488, the 2 new elements, if the person does not follow through with attempting or committing suicide, that would be a class A person misdemeanor. And then if they do follow through with attempting or committing suicide, that would be a severity level 7 person felony. And House Bill 2488 also increases the severity level for A2, which was intentionally assisting another person to commit or attempt to commit suicide. It raises that from a 9 to a 7 as well. I also, Madam Chair, if you wanted me to go through the kind of description of intentionally for the culpable mental state, I could do that for you.
If you would, that would be good. I think that's an important piece of this.
So the statutes provide that a person acts intentionally or with intent with respect to the nature of such person's conduct or to a result of such person's conduct when it is such person's conscious objective or desire to engage in the conduct or cause the result. All crimes defined in this code in which the mental culpability requirement is expressed as intentionally or with intent are specific intent crimes. A crime may provide that other culpability requirement is a specific intent. So,
thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? Okay, then we will go ahead and hear from our neutral testimony on WebEx, Martin Kearney.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you yet. Are you, are we going to be able to see you?
I'm waving at the moment.
Okay, there you are. Yes, we can see you. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for hearing my testimony today. My name is Martin Keary, and I'm here to describe my experience with the site Sanctioned Suicide, a forum where suicide is both encouraged and supported, a site that gets millions of page views a month. I first came into contact with Sanctioned Suicide when a 17-year-old musician I knew used the forum to help him commit suicide. When looking over the conversations he had on the forum, a few things stood out to me. First, he described how he had never spoken to a mental health professional about his feelings and that his parents had no idea what he was thinking of doing. Despite this, most users on the platform continued to encourage him and actively assist his research. While looking through his posts, I discovered that he had announced his intention to place himself in front of a train and sought advice because he was worried the effort might fail. One response to this, which is representative of the majority opinion, was, your biggest consequence is going to be either permanent damage or hospitalization. Both can be avoided with enough research and planning, end quote. This started a research thread where multiple people participated, assessing different train models to figure out which would be the most likely to kill you rather than simply knock you aside. It was determined that the most successful approach would be for him to place his neck on the track as the train approached and make sure that the oncoming train did not have a front guard which could potentially thwart his efforts. This is exactly what he did. His final post on the forum was what is called a goodbye thread, a common ceremony where the person committing suicide describes their final moments, receiving farewells as well as morbid questions. Later, after I posted an objection on the forum, I was contacted by numerous parents of other victims on the site. It was from speaking to them that I decided to publish a video about the site to warn people of its dangers. I'm thankful that this video was seen by millions of people, and it's my understanding that it's been shared with this committee today. I want to use the remainder of my time to quickly describe the most dangerous and toxic aspects of the Sanctioned Suicide Forum. The first and most obvious thing I noticed is the total lack of responsible content moderation. Users can suggest explicit methods to other anonymous users with impunity. In fact, moderators encourage this by banning those who advise others to seek treatment. The philosophy espoused by those who created the forum is very influential on its mainly young user base, and it's not hard to see that it's intentionally crafted to undermine the efforts of mental health specialists. Mental health or emergency services, users are told, are only interested in money and just want to lock you up. Don't speak to them. Parents, users are told, are not to be trusted. If you tell them what you're thinking, they'll just invalidate your feelings and call emergency services to get you locked up. The most commonly stated argument on the platform is that only suicidal people can understand other suicidal people. Those who are successful, those who won the game of life, just don't understand. They're anti-suicide for selfish reasons. They just want to make themselves feel better. They can't be trusted. Sanctioned suicide also operates as a marketplace where those looking to purchase the means to end their lives, usually a type of poison, can find links to sellers who provide it. I verified this last year, when I found details on the forum leading me to a seller named Kenneth Law, who sold me a substance called sodium nitrite, which, when dissolved in water and ingested in sufficient quantity, prevents blood cells from transferring oxygen and kills you. During this time, I was in touch with a journalist at the Times of London who was investigating Kenneth Law. His subsequent article led to Kenneth's arrest, and he is now facing 14 counts of first-degree murder in Ontario, Canada. He is alleged to be linked to over 100 deaths worldwide, with victims ranging from 16 to 36 years old. Kenneth did not ask for my age when he sold me sodium nitrite, and there are numerous other sellers like him who find customers on the Sanctioned Suicide Forum. Worst of all, registration and age verification is not required. The site has no barriers in place that would prevent anyone from viewing detailed instructions on every conceivable method of killing yourself. From speaking to multiple suicide prevention charities and mental health specialists, I've come to understand the importance of a concept known as a mental health crisis. This is a period of time when the victim loses the capacity to think about the future and falls into an intense mental pain. It's exactly this moment when a patient must be carefully cared for, and there has been a lot of research showing that the likelihood of suicide is drastically reduced once a mental health crisis episode is passed. Sanctioned suicide has no systems in place that would enable users to recognize a mental health crisis, which means that they regularly distribute appalling advice to people at the worst possible moment. Moreover, those with learning disabilities or conditions such as schizophrenia, who may be unable to critically assess advice given to them at crucial moments, also pass completely unnoticed and are treated the same as everyone else. It is a disaster. Lastly, it's worth mentioning that the founders of the site also run the most successful incel forum on the web. This forum is an anti-women site, also rife with rape fantasies, racism, homophobia, conspiracy theories, and anti-Semitism. It is, according to a report by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, also linked to at least one mass shooting in the US. These are the people advising our children to kill themselves. Again, I'd like to thank this committee for taking the time to listen to my testimony on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you for that testimony. It's just appalling. Committee, what questions do you have for our neutral Representative Mon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is probably going to be a generational gap question, because in preparation for this hearing, I kind of tried to just do a regular internet search for, how do you kill yourself? And I couldn't find the sites like the one you're talking about. How easy are these things to access? And maybe it's just because, as I say, I'm 52 and probably not as knowledgeable about the internet as some young people, but I'm just curious as to how easily accessible these things are.
Well, what I can say is, you have the concept of dark web sites, which are naturally quite difficult to access, and you need special technology to do so. This is available. It ranks quite highly in Google, but you have to use the right search terms. Now, I haven't come prepared with a list of search terms. It wasn't a question I was expecting this precisely, but I can just say, as a person who does work in web, that millions of page views a month implies very heavy, what they called SEO optimization, meaning it ranks very, very heavily at the top of Google rankings. But I'm not exactly certain of the search terminology. What I can say is I think if you type something like "I want to kill myself," that's a red flag for Google, because they just go, right, well, that's such an obvious term. Let's show them, support for the Samaritans, other types of charities. So there are different types of questions you might ask. But regardless, people are finding their way there. So the barriers are very, very low.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's my searches always came up with, here's ways to help yourself, rather than here's the ways to actually kill yourself. But yeah, I appreciate the insight. Thank you.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Kearney. Or Madam Chair. Long week, and it's only Thursday. Mr. Kearney, my recollection is that when I was a student at Wichita State University 45 years ago or more, taking criminal investigations, that we had textbooks and assigned readings and the like that described methods in which people committed suicide. And that was part of our course of study so as to assist us in recognizing suicide as compared with a homicide, which might be made to look like a suicide, and related topics. And there were very explicit descriptions of how to use ligatures, how to use sodium nitrate, how to use carbon monoxide, etc. And all of that was available at the university bookstore. I bought it because it was part of the course of study. Would you advocate that that type of academic literature be eliminated from the internet or the college bookstore or the bookstore? Because we know that there are a number of people who could take that same information and use it in their own lives. What do we do about that? How do we maintain that free exchange of ideas, information, and education, yet still comply with what you'd like to see accomplished?
So I think
Okay, could I
sorry.
just real quick? I think he's neutral, so he's not advocating necessarily. Representative
I
Carmichael.
apologize, but the position, even though he says he's neutral, and I'm not with respect to the bill, I'm with respect to his testimony about these websites, whether or not we ought to take the educational literature out of the university library that's used in criminal investigations because there are these dark websites. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, and Mr. Kearney, if you're comfortable answering that question, please do. If not, I think one of the later proponents could also possibly be able to answer the question.
I'm happy to answer. Well, what you're describing is a textbook that's usually aimed at informing, often for positive reasons, as you mentioned, to help people identify certain methods and stuff like that. Also, it's important to understand reach. Like if you publish a book and it's available, in a store, the potential reach of that is quite limited compared to the sort of traffic you get. Again, remember, millions of page views a month. How many books sell millions of books every single month? So reach has to be taken into consideration. Also, intent has to be taken into consideration. I feel now I have no feelings about this bill one way or the other, but the difference between a textbook that's published and a forum where people can target you and specifically inform you about certain methods of suicide without knowing anything about you are poles apart. They're not even comparable. Now, the question about what do we accidentally end up banning when we ban something else is not something I'm going to weigh in on. What I can say is that a forum where people can actively discuss suicide also provides a way for abusers to intentionally get a kick out of, encouraging people to commit suicide. We have no idea on an anonymous forum to what extent abusers go in and take advantage of people by intentionally informing them or pushing them just for sick reasons. And there have been examples. For example, a guy called Craig McKinley in Scotland just last year, who was arrested for luring someone using this site to his flat, where he then went and sexually assaulted her under the pretense of practicing a suicide attempt. Again, that those facts separate those things so dramatically in my mind that I think really the goal here is to make sure that the textbooks don't end up getting banned accidentally. But how that's done is I stand back from that. The only thing I wanted to make clear was there's a very obvious difference between the two.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I do have a question. When you mentioned Kenneth Law, who was subsequently arrested in Canada, did they have a law like this in place? So I'm just curious, how did that happen there?
I think if I'm wrong, I'm sure Kelly Wilson, who I also see here, will correct me later. But I believe that if I'm correct, I believe there were people in Canada who they could verify he had sent the means to commit suicide to, and therefore within their own jurisdiction they could see that he had provided the material means, and I imagine that's illegal, but I don't know anything more than that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Committee, do you have any other questions for Mr. Kearney? Okay, thank you. We appreciate you joining us in Kansas here. And I think we'll move on. Thank you. Okay, committee, we will go ahead with the proponents. I think we were kind of given, like we're kind of shooting for 4 or 5 minutes for testimony. We're not really going to cut you off, but that's sort of what we're shooting for. I think that you were told that ahead of time. So you should be prepared. Okay, I'll go ahead and call up Steve Dennis on behalf of William Gregory Dennis. Did you not want to go first? Absolutely. Jennifer? Thank you for being here. We do appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. We thought we raised our kids in a great big bubble. William Dennis, our son, was your classic middle child. As a young boy, he was ornery. In high school, he played sports. He liked to ruck and do Navy SEAL training. We had William evaluated a few times for mental health because he spent a lot of time alone. The professionals always told us William was okay. Not one time did William admit to being depressed or suicidal. When William died, he was 2 semesters away from a nursing degree at Rockhurst School of Nursing. Our psychologist, Dr. Moffat, told me he is 100% certain William would still be alive today if not for 2 things: COVID and the website Sanctioned Suicide. William struggled during COVID. William had ADHD. COVID was rough on him. During COVID, William decided not to be a nurse and with our encouragement moved in with his brother at the University of Kansas. It was Christmas break 2021 and he was home with us. He had told us he had a full-time job over Christmas break at Walmart. On January 8th, 2022, he walked down our stairs in his Walmart vest and left for work. Afterwards, I had a really weird feeling. So I called my husband. Steve drove through the local Walmart parking lot and did not see William's car. I then called William and I said, "William, are you lying about working at Walmart?" And he said, "Yes, Mom. Mom, I'm coming home. I need to get something out of my room. Then I'm meeting some friends for lunch so we can watch a bit of the Chiefs game, and then I'll be back." I said, "Okay." William came home. I said, "William, you don't need to lie to us if you don't want to work over your break. We don't care if you work." I then said, "I think you need a mental health evaluation." He looked at me and he said, "You know what, Mom? I agree with you. I'll be back." William did not return after the Chiefs game. My husband called one of William's 2 close friends, Jonathan. Jonathan told us he had not seen William in a long time, and William was always talking about sanctioned suicide. William had told us he had just spent New Year's Eve with Jonathan. So William had been lying to us. We called the Lenexa police immediately. The police speak to another friend on Hill who says William was talking about sanctioned suicide, a gun, and sodium nitrite. Steve and I are in panic mode. We can't think straight. We drive all over the KC metro area all night long looking for a navy blue Honda Accord. The morning of January 9th, about 9:30, I log into William's bank account, and finally a charge has come through at a hotel just 3 miles from our home. The police go there and find William's body. Dr. Baxter, a retired doctor, read the autopsy report. He told us William left our house and immediately drove directly to the Lenexa Hotel, mixed up the sodium nitrite with water, drank it, and died. William was found with a scale, a bottle of sodium nitrite, red Solo cups from our pantry, a gun, and hollow point bullets. The television was blaring. The water was running in the bathtub and in the sink. The freezer door was open. Towels were strategically placed on the bathroom floor in front of the toilet. About a week and a half earlier, UPS delivered a package to me as Steve and I were leaving for the airport. It contained sodium nitrite, and I handed it to William. I did not know the package contained sodium nitrite. It was from Lab Alley in Austin, Texas, and I said, "William, what is this?" And he said, "School supplies, Mom." And the week of the funeral, sodium nitrite continued to show up in our mailbox. My husband initially was able to access William's computer and the pictures on his Apple iPhone. We know William logged into sanctioned suicide at the beginning of December 2021. We also know William had instructions from sanctioned suicide telling him how to die by sodium nitrite. We shipped William's computer and Apple iPhone to a computer expert. The computer expert plugged William's computer into his equipment and discovered William placed BitLocker on his computer, which has made it impossible for our expert to evaluate his computer. The phone evidence we could not recover from Apple. Sanctioned suicide tells its users to destroy their technology before they die. Dr. Chris Calkins, who is doing a psychological autopsy of William, has spent time on sanctioned suicide. He says the site reminds him of the way terrorists are trained. Sanctioned suicide calls suicide catching the bus. William caught the bus on January 9th, 2022. House Bill 2676 will save lives. William had an undiagnosed mental illness. Instead of coming to his parents for help, he went to sanctioned suicide, where he was brainwashed by sociopaths. These sociopaths did not love William. They were not professionals such as doctors or psychologists. The sociopaths behind sanctioned suicide have one goal: as much death by suicide as possible, and we as parents desperately need your help. Law enforcement needs to be able to identify the perpetrators and hold them accountable for their actions so that this website comes down. I beg you today to make that happen. Please give us the tools to fight for our children's lives. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank Representative Landwehr for listening to our call for help. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story. We will just let everyone do questions at the end of the proponent. So, yeah, thank you. Okay, Steve Dennis, please come on up.
He said they might be able to show a video or a slide of a photo. Esteemed members of the House of Representatives, I'm honored to stand here before you. I'm grateful for your attention to our testimony. My name is Steve Dennis. I'm a lifelong Kansan. I am joined here with my wife, Jennifer, who just spoke. We've been married since 1992. Our family resided in Lenexa, Kansas since our marriage. We've raised 3 sons, Jonathan, William, and Stephen. And I'm here to address you about a heartbreaking story about Will. You just heard the majority of the story from my wife. You know, January 9th, we found Will had logged into sanctioned suicide, and he'd only been on the site for 4 weeks. Actually logged in and created a profile. This devastating event has prompted us to share our details to everyone we know, because we were shocked when we found out he was on the site. We didn't even know a site like this existed. I couldn't in my wildest dreams have ever imagined what you guys just heard from the earlier testimony, that someone is sitting on a computer every day giving people instruction to kill themselves. It's a criminal act. I call it serial killers. I think it's a terroristic act. I think there's a lot of layers here, and it's a very complex laws that we're going to have to try to figure out. But that website is in everyone's pocket at school. It's in everyone's pocket at home. It's not in a library or a bookstore at a university. These kids are carrying it, and if they ever want to just put a couple of words in there on the right search engine, they pull it right up, and they can be in there chatting with these people anytime, any day. Raising children in today's world is undoubtedly challenging, especially with the constant, they're just being inundated with negative content on news channels. You got social media, you've got TikTok, you got all these different sources these kids are getting this information from. As a parent, I always felt responsible to shield our kids from harmful content and emphasize the importance of education. Each of our sons received a robust education, including warnings about dangers to negative podcasts, websites, and social media. Their schools constantly emphasize the significance of refraining from posting regrettable photos or comments online due to their permanence. It'll always be there. We even delved into discussion of the dark web, the illicit websites. Despite our efforts and accessibility to the information on the internet made it challenging to fully protect our children, leading us to prioritize education. Like my wife mentioned, we really thought we had our kids in a bubble. We actually would talk about it occasionally. We've really been blessed to be able to have our children. We felt our family bubble, our community bubble, and we really thought we had them protected. I'm responsible for my kids' safety and my family's safety. And I honestly thought I had my kids protected. And now I get to carry the guilt for the rest of my life that there was a door open to my home. There was access into my kids that I just wasn't aware of. And it's my ignorance that I did not know sanctioned suicide existed or websites are even capable of that. Following William's tragic suicide, my wife mentioned I got access to his computer and his phone. I did get into his computer. I pulled up several files. A lot of the files are information he downloaded from sanctioned suicide. You can see here in this photo, that's my son. We think he was sitting at Johnson County Community College Library. He's taking a picture there of some of the wonderful information he receives from these terrorists. Serial killers like to call them. I'll be killing myself today. Here's part of my plan. I'll make another thread once tomorrow hits, and I'll head to the room that I booked. But for now, this is what my plan looks like. 25 grams of sodium nitrite in 3 different 50 milliliter water cups. 25 milligrams in each 50 milliliter water cup. 1 hour before drinking, 600 milligrams, I'll take 600 milligrams of ibuprofen. It's got a schedule, it's got a time, and they even have video demonstrations of people doing live suicides on these sites in these private chats. So we're not talking about a textbook here, folks. This is social media. It is a generational gap. These kids are so much smarter than we are. The parents have no chance of trying to keep ahead of them. They can get into private chats and pull up this kind of information. It normalizes what they're doing. It actually gives them the instructions, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Here's how you're going to feel once you drink this. This is how you're going to feel 2 minutes in, 5 minutes in. It gives them confidence to end their life. These people are coaching these kids. My son was very intelligent. He's smarter than my wife and I, obviously. He outsmarted us. And he went to a website that does nothing but give them the instructions and the confidence to do what he did. And it's a temporary state of mind. If he would have just lasted another week, if we could have actually got one piece, if we would have looked at that box and my wife and I had any clue what sodium nitrite was, we actually could have had a conversation with him. We could have got him the help he would have had. We would have sent him anywhere in the world to help him with his mental condition. And we did not get that chance. These people took our rights to be parents from our child, and we were not there to protect them. And it's unreal. I'm not going to repeat a lot of things about the website you've already heard about, the catch the bus phrase. It's just like Facebook. They got little acronyms. They're giving each other emojis. These people start talking to each other, and they're like, somebody comes in and says, hey, you should slow down. You should think about doing something good or go get help. And then somebody else will come right in like a moderator, and they'll just tell them that you're right. Their philosophy is, like you've heard earlier, medicine's not good, parents are not good, society's not good. It's your right to do what you're going to do. And again, we're talking about kids under the age of 25. So one of the things that I pulled up that I thought was really interesting is that these people are so passionate about what they do, they'll attack the parents when they try to engage the moderators or anyone on the site. You'll hear testimony later about a parent that actually got hacked by the people that run the site. The moderator's name is Rain and Sadness. I mean, this is just, you can't make it up. Just the basics of the website. You log in and create a username and password. You heard earlier, it's check the box. Are you over the age of 80? Check the box. Are you of good mental status? Check the box. Now you're in. Now you can get into the private chats. People will look for what your post says, and they'll just swim to you like sharks. And they start giving you all the information you want. And again, these are sociopaths. Make very clear that what you're dealing with here is a criminal element. The users send so much information, and it's like an Amazon. One story we read, it was like it's an Amazon of all the things you can possibly order and have at your house within 24 hours that'll end your life. It's way too easy. And when we're dealing with such a short window of time to help somebody in this state, we don't have the time to react. We can't react. The piece that you heard too that's very alarming is that William did go in. I actually got into his username on his account in sanctioned suicide, and they did have him, and he did delete his chats. The only thing I had was a file that was saved to his computer that was actually a screenshot that had the chats that he had went in and liked and comments that he was making back to people. So I did get that, and I was fortunate enough to get that because for whatever reason, iCloud had backed up his photos, and I did get his photos. I couldn't get into the actual iPhone itself because they, thanks to Apple and their technology laws, we cannot get into it even when you lose your son. Sanctioned suicide's been around since 2018, but prior to that, there's been other sites, obviously. The peaceful, the different stories and things that people do out there that think they're helping people that are trying to end their life with dignity. These kids are getting swept up in that. We have got a group of people in society that are suffering from depression, or they have anxiety issues, and they've got through COVID. And then you've got this industry out there, which it is an industry. Make it very clear, that will draw these folks in and month out with 10 million plus hits. You've got to understand that these folks, since they've been online, their site web page openings have gone from 6 million to 10 million. They just did a recent survey that over 50% of those 10 million of those web views are under the age of 25. So again, that's what we're very passionate about, is that it's just the wrong group of folks that need help. And we urgently plea for your help, and want you to know that under the guise of the First Amendment, these people will continue to exploit vulnerable individuals on a very large scale. And we implore your support for House Bill 2676. It's going to be a vital step in protecting citizens of Kansas from the harmful influences of such websites. Special thanks to Representative Lambert for bringing the bill up to vote. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. We appreciate that, your story. Christy Kahn, if you would please come up. Thank you for being with us.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for all the work on this bill, especially Representative Landwehr. This right here was my son, Kai Kahn. He was my miracle child, my only child. I remember the day that the doctor told me that, congratulations, I was finally going to have a child after 8 years. The day my son was born was the happiest day of my life, and the day he died was the worst day of my life. 18 years is not enough time. I remember fondly when he was little, our bedtime routine would include saying goodnight to each other and blowing kisses and saying, "Got it." I remember how he was always fascinated by medicine. And when I would go to the doctor and get my blood drawn, he'd be watching it intently. I guess I shouldn't have been shocked that he grew up wanting to become a nurse and help others. These are the types of memories a mother should have, not the memories of driving 3 hours to get to the ER where he's at, not the memory of waiting for hours for a plane ride to an ICU in Missouri. Another memory a mother should never have is opening up her front door to 2 police officers 6 months later after that attempt, telling you your child is gone. I'm coming up on the 2-year anniversary, and I can still hear my screams. I can still feel the ground as my knees hit the ground. To this day, I often unplug my doorbell because I just get the anxiety. No mother should have to go to a funeral home and say goodbye to their only child. Well, life is going on for everyone else. Others, classmates are graduating college, getting married, having babies. Their parents are becoming grandparents. I'll never have that. No mother should see their child on a table, lifeless and blue. Have to feel or see the dead hands with the fingers curled like this and hold them and feel like they're grasping back and apologize that you could not protect them from a hateful world. Days after that goodbye, I picked up his items from the police station and his items from his dorm. And that was the beginning of my quest to find answers of what happened, because it was so well planned out. This right here was his suicide note, and that blue is the sodium nitrite that was used. This is the detailed list of all he took and at what times. This is his instructions on what he wanted done with his body. And this was the instructions because even then he was thinking of others. And the cleaning lady that would come to their dorm, he didn't want her to find him and said, call 911. I have committed suicide with sodium nitrite. Do not look at my bed or else you will see a dead body. And then I have some screenshots to show. That one right there states a few, that's my son. And I'll have you know, when you see their names crossed out, that is because they teach them to let them know when they're going to do it so they can cross their names out so they know, everybody knows they're dead. A few months ago, I spontaneously took my new entire bottle of Prestige. I started getting nauseous by the last handful. On top of this and my heart pounding, I freaked out and got a friend who accidentally got me to an urgent care instead of an ER and sat with me in a back room while medical staff waited with me for an ambulance to come pick me up. I feel guilty for the pain I saw her eyes in there. But the bigger guilt I have is because I think I gave my mom PTSD or at least some trauma I know she could benefit from trying to work through. She sat with me in the ER, watching them suction the foam from my mouth. The plane ride to a larger hospital's ICU to being tubed. I am her only child because of fertility issues. I grew up being called their miracle baby because I wasn't even supposed to make it to birth. My attempt and her seeing everything seriously broke her, and I can tell. She hasn't stopped breathing down my neck since, and she has to call me every single day to soothe her anxiety of me doing it again. I cannot vent even just about everyday school stress. That is the least of my problems, without her going overboard with worry. I used to be able to vent to her, but now I keep everything to myself, even more than I did before my attempt. I don't know how hard this most likely successful attempt will truly send her. And then the next slide. And this was the response he got. And notice the names not crossed up. When you decide to have a baby, you agree to all the fallout that comes with it. She doesn't want you to die because of her own selfish reasons. Probably the same reasons she decided to have you. My mom decided to keep me knowing my father didn't want me. She gave the example, having you saved my life because it gave me a reason to live. Oh, thank you, Mom. Glad my suffering helped you. And then the next slide. And then the other response was, and they are crossed off. Or you know it's because she loves him. True love, once again from the other person not crossed out, that's antagonizing. True love is unconditional. She would love him or her regardless, or if he wanted to die or not. So if he wants to die and she can't accept that, is selfishness on her part. Can't really see how you can refute that. I can promise you, the other person, I can promise you she won't stop loving him just because he died. Then why not let him have what he wants? Let me guess, because it would cause her pain, right? And then the other person responded, they're going to have to make their own choice. Got nothing to do with let him or not. And then he had said, and quoted my son, well, she hasn't stopped breathing down my neck since. Doesn't sound like she accepts his ability to make his own choice. And so then, I think you can go one more. My son had responded, and his username was not about angels. She doesn't try to stop any of my choices, but she's hyper aware of anything that could point to me deciding I'm going to hurt myself again. I don't like it, but she's traumatized, and I'm not mad at her for the way she acts. It's more sympathy, as I know she does all this to soothe her anxiety. And then another person responded, suicide does cause pain to others. And while I know that it can be hard to deal with for them, the way I see it, we all have a right to exit at a time of our choosing. And we have no obligation to stay alive as we did not choose to exist. It is a personal decision when to leave this world. I am sorry for all the suffering that has brought you to this point. It sounds like you've been through a lot. I can imagine that it must have been awful going through that attempt. I wish you the best in whatever happens. And then the next slide. This is when they're discussing what meds they get. And they even teach you to get the meds, how to get like prescription meds through an online doctor by saying you have migraines. And those meds help to keep you from getting sick and throwing up the sodium nitrite. I currently only have 310 milligrams, while the PPH, which stands for the Personal Pill Handbook, 400 milligrams mixed. PPH suggests 400 milligrams mixed with the SN, sodium nitrite. Should I still try to use this in my regimen or skip it? And the same one who was egging him on before stated, if you got it, definitely use it. And then this one, my son asked, should I CTB, catching the bus, crossing the bridge in my dorm, or should I book a hotel room? I live alone and have my own bathroom in my dorm and wouldn't be found for probably at least 8 hours. And people asking who would find you. The other one antagonizing, well, what method? Another one saying, I suggest the hotel room. That way you're not causing only trouble to anyone you know. And he had responded, who would find you? There's a crisis team that does wellness checks, which will probably call for me since I won't be answering my phone. And I had a previous attempt at the dorm on record. And his answer to what method was SN or N, which is sodium nitrite, or N, which also stands for, next slide. That right there is a list of all the different threads for methods to use for them to kill themselves with detailed instructions. And it tells them to get more info in the Peaceful Pill Handbook. And then the next one. This one is just to show, this was another Kansas poster. And they also have a buddy system where you can find somebody to buddy up with and kill yourselves together. And they've even live streamed them killing themselves together. And this one said, I live in Kansas. Without transportation, the method I'm considering is hanging. I have access to Valium. Would like a partner. I'm 42 and fat, so if that bothers you, don't reply. And then the next. This post will be dedicated to compiling all the info we have on the sodium nitrite method, including what else is needed and comparing it to other popular methods. Before taking, I highly encourage you read most, if not all, of the chapters in the Personal Pill Handbook, as this method may not be the most suited for you. First of all, let's discuss why this method works and how it kills. So then there's a link for all the effects of sodium nitrite. And then now let's take a look at the shopping cart, which says spoiler, what is needed, where you can link and order everything you need. Next slide. Gives the generic names of the dopamine blockers to take. And one talks about how he asked around town to see how easy it was to get the items. And only one shopkeeper asked me, well, who advised for this medicine? And he said, I told him a friend is a doctor, and through the phone, they gave me without billing. So you just try something like this. After seeing all these, I called the detective, and I was shocked and devastated to hear that Kansas has no law in place to make this a crime. Those who wish to prey on the suffering and vulnerable have more rights than my son and so many others. There are laws to protect vulnerable people scammed out of money, but not from being pushed over the edge to the point that they can't think clearly and are just hearing, do it, do it, do it. There is no hope. This is the only way. So tell me, is money really more important than actual lives? And to answer the question too, I found this site originally just by entering suicide, and it brought up if you're feeling suicidal, call the number, and then sanctioned suicide was right under that.
So Christy, I just want to make sure we're able to get to everybody. We have, and thank you for, we have all the slides, and it was hard to read them up there, but we do have them here. Okay. So, yeah, just so you know that, but tell us, what you want us to know, because we want to hear, but I also want to make sure we get to the other folks.
Right.
Yep.
Basically, I beg you to pass this bill and protect other mothers. I know this isn't going to bring my son back. It's not going to bring their son back, but we can protect other kids. And that's what we need to do. They're vulnerable. This is so easily available to them, and there needs to be a law passed. If there are actual consequences, maybe somebody will think about that before these actions are taken.
Thank you. And you'll stay in case anyone has a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Okay, now we'll have Kelly Wilson. And Kelly Wilson is on WebEx, I believe.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, Kelly, thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
We can see you and hear you. So thank you.
Okay, great. All right. So my name is Kelly Wilson. I lost my 18-year-old son on April 25th of 2020. He died by suicide. Junior was a bright young man filled with so many hopes and dreams. I cannot believe he will never be here again. I found my son hanging on his bathroom door with a belt around his neck. And quite honestly, I prefer not to go into the rest, as it is so gut-wrenching and very hard for me to speak about. It wasn't long after he died that I looked on his phone and saw multiple tabs opened. They were titled sanctionsuicide.com. I could not believe what I was looking at when I opened the pages of that site. The amount of people that were giving very public instructions, encouragement on how to kill themselves was horrifying. For those of you who don't know, I went on to search for other victims of this site, which were not hard to find. I made calls to every law enforcement agency there is, and I had many conversations with Congress. All of this started in June of 2020. In January of 2021 is when Megan Twohey from the New York Times contacted me. I worked with her every day for a year to find the identities of the two men running this website. Throughout this journey, these two men have done everything they can to stop any parent that speaks out against them. LaMarcus Small published all of my personal information last year after I did the video with Martin. I have received multiple threats, death threats actually, and 2 months ago, one of their associates hacked my personal email and my work email and proceeded to publish my passwords on Twitter. I have no idea how they found out this information because I don't even give it to parents. They are well aware of what they are doing and have been brilliant by using the lack of legislation, Section 230, and the First Amendment to protect the harms they are actively committing. I could go on and on about the methods that they use to entice, promote, and hide their actions, but my time is limited and that knowledge should not become public. I'm here to support House Bill 2676. It is imperative that we do whatever we can to protect vulnerable people while they are struggling and in their darkest moments. It is no secret that the way people communicate has drastically changed over the years. The common denominator here is that the people that are encouraging suicide, sharing methods, and method sources are online and anonymous. So the only thing I might add to this bill is that listing websites as individuals is also important. The websites are the gathering point for most and where the grooming begins. Without adding that, this leaves lawyers and police officers trying to identify and prosecute individual members who are encouraged instead of chopping off the head of the snake. I appreciate what everyone here is doing and the time that you are taking to listen to our stories. To be clear, in 2020, I had already had extensive meetings with the offices of Josh Hawley, Marsha Blackburn, Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, Roger Wicker, and more. They were all very well aware of not only sanctioned suicide, but sodium nitrite. Nothing was done. I made my contact from the Department of Justice aware of everything surrounding Kenneth Law, even his name, in early of 2022. But I had to sit back yet again and wait for a reporter to break that story, which took another year. Time and time again, I've had to use the media to bring awareness to this, and I'm not sure why something so sinister is still actively occurring. In fact, last night, I was conversing with a source about cannibals that are actively preying on suicidal individuals from sanctioned suicide. They're directing its members from sanctioned suicide to Discord chat rooms and then luring people by using suicide pacts so that they can meet up. We must act quickly and we must incorporate the technology that is being used to commit these heinous acts. If anyone is interested in the overwhelming amount of evidence that I have to support what I'm saying, I have no problem sharing it and will be happy to support it any way I can. My son should have never ended up on a website like this, and neither should anyone else. That's all.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate your words. And if you just stay online, someone might have a question for you after a couple more folks speak. Thank you. Okay, we have Bruce Brown, who is on WebEx.
My name is Bruce Brown. I'm a resident of Clear Creek County, Colorado, just west of Denver. Thank you for allowing me to testify on HB 24-2676. It's an important bill that creates a framework to reduce suicides that all too often are encouraged through internet communications. Recently, I was contacted by Representative Poskins, who asked me to tell my family's story. In August 2022, I took my last road trip with my 17-year-old son, Bennett, just before he was leaving for college. Honestly, he was not enthusiastic about the several-hour drive from Colorado through Kansas to see a Royals game in 105-degree heat. But I will forever remember him, at first nervously behind the wheel of the car helping me drive, then as miles turned, more confident as I could see him growing into the man I knew he would become. In one of those moments that makes a dad happiest, I remember after the trip, him remarking that although he didn't really want to go, he had a great time and was very thankful. Just 5 months later, Bennett died from sodium nitrite in the pure form, which is the one we seek to regulate. He poisoned himself at age 17. Just weeks ago would have been his 19th birthday. A funny, loving kid, smart as a whip, deft on a soccer field. I miss him every day. While Bennett was wonderful, he also suffered from long COVID, and isolating himself from his peers took a toll. On the internet, he found encouragement to take a poison that could ease his pain and ordered sodium nitrite from an out-of-state sportsman supply store for $13.99. Had he not been prodded by an internet full of grim reapers to access a quick painless and easy death to be relieved from his pain, he would be alive today. After grief-filled months, I wondered what we could do to prevent this post-suicide suffering for other families who otherwise might lose a loved one to suicide. I started connecting with many of the families here online today, from England to New York, and even to your Kansas neighbors in Lenox. I reached out to my Colorado Assembly representatives, and we began to discuss ways in which we could prevent the suffering by so many families of dozens of dead brothers, sons, and daughters. I researched, talked to everyone in the know, read science articles, news articles, appeared on TV with one goal in mind: stop suicides, in hope that the Bennetts of this world will live long enough to cry for help and be saved. That's all I'm asking. Laws which impose consequences on people who would encourage other people to take their lives will be another proactive step to address this out-of-control death by poison. Just last Tuesday, the bill brought in Colorado to take pure sodium nitrite out of the hands of consumers passed the House on a bipartisan 60-4 vote. I'm hopeful that this bill will next pass in the Colorado Senate. Here, I want to express my gratitude to Representatives Poskin and Landwehr for bringing House Bill 242676. In advance of your votes in this body, I want to thank you as well for using your power to save lives and holding people accountable who would take the most vulnerable people among us away. I am a lawyer. I was a two-term elected district attorney, and I listened with interest to Representative Carmichael's questions at the beginning of this hearing and did some real-time research. The questions that were asked about the phrasing "another person," while a good question, those phrase words are common across the country, in particular in Kansas, amongst many statutes. It just means another person to be contrasted with the public at large. So the regulation here would address communications to specific persons, not to the public at large. As far as the verbiage of undue influence, other Kansas court cases have addressed that is an undefined term. In particular, the case of State versus Ahart, AHART, from the Kansas Court of Appeal in 2013. They found under the circumstances of that case, undue influence didn't need any special definition, but was commonly understood by jurors and was permissible in defining the statute under consideration there. I apologize. I do need to go and catch an airplane. So, Madam Chair, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now, but I will have to run as I'm needed to go back to Colorado. Thank you, and God bless each of you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We appreciate you being with us. Yeah. Okay, Representative Carmichael would like to ask you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brown, I express my sympathy, and I appreciate the fact that you continue to advocate for others, and I'm sure that goes without saying. I think, though, you do hone in properly on what my concern was as expressed to our revisor. And we've received testimony here today about websites, for example, that are available to anyone. And I'm trying to identify for you. We're having audio difficulties. If you can't hear me, let me know by raising your hand or something. Okay. What I'm trying to identify is whether we're trying to prohibit, or whether, in your view, this legislation prohibits communications with a particular individual whom the actor believes is contemplating ending their life, or whether, as you at least see this legislation, we're trying to, in essence, take down websites that are available for the general public, not directed to any particular individual, but which people contemplating suicide, or maybe somebody doing a paper in an administration or criminal justice class could access. Do you understand my quandary here? And I'd appreciate your insight.
Thank you very much, Representative Carmichael, Madam Chair. I don't see a problem with the First Amendment free speech aspects that you raise with this piece of legislation. I think that it's not criminalizing general speech, it's criminalizing specific speech directed towards, quote, another person, an identifiable individual with mental states which subsume that somebody is aware that that person has a desire, an intent, or is taking preparatory acts in order to commit suicide. It's not going to take down websites. It's going to enable prosecutors, if they can identify those specific actors who've done the prohibited acts, and that's a tall act, but it can be done. That's the people that will be criminalized. And if prosecutors try to use this generally, court's going to throw it out as unconstitutional as applied.
And I agree with your interpretation. My concern is that some people who've already testified before this committee may be disappointed with the outcome of this law. But my second question is the circumstance where someone goes into the library and says to the reference librarian, I want a book about how to commit suicide, not how to end my life, but the general concept. In your view, should we prohibit the librarian from directing someone toward that book? Or is it permissible or appropriate in your view to allow someone to make that request so long as they don't say, I think I'm wanting to end my life. Can you direct me to a textbook which would help me? Can you help us, the committee, with that concept as well?
Thank you, Representative Carmichael. Yes, I can. And the First Amendment protects the publication of speech that advocates for suicide and would provide information about the means to commit suicide in the general. Once that person who wants to check out the book, if they indicate to the librarian that their purpose is to gain knowledge on how to commit suicide, then we're getting closer, because then the person who's dispensing the information has specific knowledge about why this person wants the information. And then you're crossing the moral and legal line.
I think you meant to say how to commit suicide themselves as opposed to the general concept.
Thank you, Representative Carmichael. Yes, that's an appropriate narrowing, and I did not mean to say generally. Right, yeah. It's that individual. It's got to be a person. That's what we morally are trying to deal with, is the individuals. We're trying to save individuals. We can't prevent the dissemination of information generally. The Constitution won't permit it.
I find your opinions very persuasive and appreciate hearing that from someone who's been through your experience. And I want to offer you my personal thanks for providing that experience to us in this context. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate you sharing your story about Bennett. Okay, committee Jill James, is that WebEx or you in person? WebEx. Okay, and Ms. James, I hope you saw that, we're trying to kind of keep it at about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. And you guys heard from me last week, so thank you for allowing me back here today. My comments will be brief. I just wanted to share with you that since my testimony, along with the 4 young men that joined me last Wednesday for House Bill 2488, since that time, the clips of that testimony have been posted onto social media. And in just a 1 week's time, we have been inundated with over 1 million views and over 3,000 plus, nearing 4,000 comments from people all over the country, but primarily from Kansas. And I want to tell you that my personal inbox, as well as the thread of these postings, has been overwhelming, not only in volume, but in emotion, because I knew this was a widespread issue. But as you read the comments, as well as the private messages that have made their way to me, it is stunning how many people are saying, I live in Kansas and my son was coerced to commit suicide 3 years ago, or my daughter was coerced to end her life, or my son was on a website. In fact, one of the people you heard a testimony from them today only learned of this bill and this hearing and made themselves available to testify because they saw that on social media. Now, why am I sharing that with you? I want you to know, not only is this an issue that we are trying to turn your attention to with a sense of urgency, but I think we also want you to know that the state of Kansas is now turning its attention to you and asking and looking and watching to see what this committee will do next. Because I can tell you that the cries are coming loud and by the millions to do something, to do something. And I also want to ask a question, and certainly I'm not an expert in the law, but I'm curious about the opponents to this House bill and to even this, I think it was the same opponents that opposed House Bill 2488. And I understand that the primary pushback is about free speech and about this being an unconstitutional law that we are seeking. And I don't understand that, and perhaps this is where your researchers can look into this, because how many people in, let's say, 2023 in the state of Kansas have utilized technology, social media, any type of digital communication to go after vulnerable people and coerce them out of money? I'm just curious, how many people have been prosecuted in the state of Kansas to coerce vulnerable people out of their money? Because I believe that probably does happen over and over and over. And I'm curious, out of those cases where these people have gone to trial, was there any lawyers or attorneys that raised their hand and said free speech as the argument of how to get their client out of that criminal conduct? Did anyone say they were exercising free speech to coerce these vulnerable people out of their money? I don't know the answer, but I can tell you, and I think we all understand, that people are utilizing the same means, digital communication, technology, their words, right, to coerce vulnerable people out of their lives. So why is it when vulnerable people are coerced out of their money, everyone collectively says crime, crime, crime? And whenever someone is coercing a vulnerable person out of their lives, there are people that have the audacity to say free speech, free speech. I think it's clear to those who are really walking in the shoes of this suicide loss that we aren't talking about speech. We are talking about criminal conduct with intent. We are talking about predators that are coming after the vulnerable. And we need your help. We need Republican and Democrat alike and everybody else in between to come together to tackle and update the out-of-date assisted suicide laws in the state of Kansas. Bring it up to date. Bring it up to what we are actually facing today. And I urge you to do it soon as legislatively possible. If for some reason the committee were to choose not to pursue action on either House Bill 2488, 2676, or a combination thereof, I assure you this issue will come back, because over 600 mothers are experiencing this every year and our numbers are growing, and it will be back year after year in front of you until something changes. So again, I want to thank the committee for the patience and the kindness to hear our stories and to receive our passion on this. These are hard stories to hear. They're even harder to live. So thank you so much for hearing us. And again, I look forward to seeing you all again when we have pens in our hands signing this into law. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming back this week. Now we will hear from Kathy Brown. She's online. Okay. Kathy Brown is online. Oh, you're here. Okay. In person. Good. Thank you. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you, ma'am. And I want to thank Representative Landwehr. I didn't know that this bill was being proposed, and the instant I knew of it, I was so glad to hear that. My name is Kathy Brown, and I'm an attorney and a nurse. Was a nurse first, now I'm an attorney. And when I read this bill, I was so excited. I wanted to come and I wanted to testify. I loved what the lady there just said when she said this is not about a partisan issue, because it's not a partisan issue. This is about kids killing themselves. I spend most of my time wishing that I had children, but when I see the difficulty these parents are dealing with and the horrible grief that they have suffered, there's a little part of me that says, well, who can imagine dealing with such a horror as that? When I was a nurse, I had patients on occasion say to me, should I go on? I'm so tired. It's costing so much money. I don't know how my statistics are. And it is inconceivable to me and any healthcare professional worthy of the name that we would ever have done anything other than say, of course it's not. Of course you're going to go on. What about your family? What about your kids? If you didn't have family and kids, you're here. You're here. You're going to fight. We're going to fight with you. And I never had a patient who came back and said to me, Kathy, you shouldn't have said that to me. It was wrong of you. You usurped my free will. Please. In terms of some of the objections that have been raised, it seems to me that it's pretty clear. We have a lot of answers to those things. We learned in the first week of law school anyhow, when you have an advertisement, that's not an offer of a contract. You don't get to go to the Mitsubishi dealer a week later and go, wait a minute, you said I could get this for, $13,000 and now it's, higher. It's not a specific offer. Also, it seems to me, we may have to tweak language, but it seems to me that questions of fact for the jury will be able to be decided by them. We tweak the language. I'm old enough to remember how the law has changed in ways it had to change. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have laws against drunk driving. It was considered, just having fun, not the requisite intent. Well, we have specific intent. We have general intent. We can deal with that. I guess what I want to say is, as I was reading the language, I employed an exercise I use sometimes when I think about if something should change. And the thing I thought of was, think how unpalatable it would be socially, culturally, and morally, not to mention legally, if the things that are suggested in this bill were not turned into something that was criminal. Think if we were to say, that's cool if you coerce, that's cool if you use instrumentalities, etc. I bet a lot of the lawyers here, and even people who aren't lawyers, watched the Michelle Carter case. It's only a couple of years ago. We all remember Michelle Carter, the young lady who said to her boyfriend, and I quote, I love you, now go die. The young man she said that to had a carbon monoxide pump in his car. And he was talking about feeling suicidal. She had great influence over him. And I think it was a landmark case that has not yet survived appeal. I hope it will. Because she spent time telling that young man he should kill himself. He got out of the car at one point because he wanted to live. She said, get back in that car. You're talking about it all the time, go do it. That's the reverse of what any human being is supposed to say to any other human being if they are talking about a despair so great that they feel as if they should kill themselves. I also want to say it's very important that this get passed and get passed now, as that lady said, because we all know what's coming. We got already the web, which is a nightmare in this way, a blessing in so many others. We have to change the law to reflect it. We used to think that marital rape was a contradiction in terms. Hello? It's not. We learn, we grow, we look at the society around us, we look at what's happening. I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews, and I see young people a lot. Look at what they're dealing with. The people who do this, I have absolutely no hesitation as a former psych nurse and as a lawyer now for some time in saying these people are sociopaths. But that's not a defense to their criminality. It's an indictment. If we have language problems, we can deal with the language problems. We can fix those language problems. We have to do this. In closing, I want to say it's also very important, I think, that we pass this bill because we know what's coming down the pike. We see the corruption and the attempted ruination of our medical, our doctors, our nurses, et cetera. You know, we're going to be having assisted suicide come along. Where there's no question of do you want to do it, it's going to be you do it. You do it. And we're going to have lobbyists who are well paid and armies of lawyers and plenty of money to urge us in that direction. Let's have this on the books so that we in Kansas signal we ain't back east where I'm from because I'm too smart to be back there. We're not that. That's not us. Let's get this on the books so when the next stuff comes down the pike, we're ready. We're ready, and we've already signaled our utter and complete unwillingness to go down this horrible road. Thank you for the opportunity to address you here today.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming. We're going to just do a few questions, committee. Representative Heiberger has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is more of a comment than a question. I mean, no disrespect at all to the loss anyone here has suffered, but Ms. Janes used the language that asks why is it not illegal to coerce someone to commit suicide, and Ms. Brown just used the same language. I just wanted to point out that under current law in Kansas, it is illegal to coerce someone to commit suicide. So, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We're changing that statute. So, but you're good to point it out that it's there. Yep. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Brown, off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with the Carter case. Can you at least share with us where it's from, et cetera, so that we can try to obtain the relevant facts concerning the status of that matter, please?
I'm sorry, it's not coming to my mind now what state it was. It's a really recent case, though, Representative. It's 2020. And I think it might have been a case.
Sorry, it's 2020, the year 2020 or the show 2020?
Oh, no, 2020. But it was on 2022.
I think Representative Landberg has an answer to that question.
Representative, that would be Massachusetts.
Oh, Massachusetts.
I think I'm now familiar with
right
because I recall the case out of Massachusetts.
And
thank you. That's all I needed. I appreciate it.
Might be a case of first impression, but good case.
Okay, committee, do we have any other questions? Representative Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a practicality of this. I appreciate everybody coming, and these are powerful testimonies today, but I notice we don't have any prosecutors on the proponent list, but when you look at these internet cases, what's the ability or likelihood of being able to actually prosecute these? You let alone the investigation to identify the person. I'm certainly sympathetic, but I'm just curious from a practical matter: are we doing more than just adopting a statute that will almost never be enforced? I don't know the answer, but I'm curious the practicality of it. If anybody can answer, if not, we can certainly find folks later.
Would anyone like to answer that question? Representative Landwehr.
And I was actually sitting here and doing a little bit of research, because when Representative Mon brought up, going in and trying to find some of these sites, and there were a couple of reports from different TV stations where they had actually investigated and they followed and they found the two individuals that actually owned the websites. And so they will be prosecuted. So is it going to be difficult? Yes. Do I care? No.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Okay, so if you also look, we have written proponent testimony from Ed Klump, and you know him and who he represents. Lucretia Knoll from the Catholic Conference, Amy Campbell from the Kansas Mental Health Coalition, and Robert Stewart from the KBI. Is the opponent testimony here or is it written? Okay, then please come on up. We don't have any neutral, and you're Emily Brandt. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Humphreys, members of the committee. My name is Emily Brandt. I'm here on behalf of the BIDS Legislative Committee. I want to start by saying we incorporate our opponent testimony to HB 2488, and we again express our sympathies for all persons impacted by suicide. We cannot imagine the pain the parents here felt on the day they learned about their child's death and still feel to this day. But like with HB 2488, we can't ignore the constitutional implications of this bill. You have my written testimony and my written testimony from last week's bill, so I won't go through it all, and I'll just maybe try to address some of the things that the proponents have said today, and then of course I'll stand for any questions at the appropriate time. First, I can speak to the Massachusetts bill, or the Massachusetts case that we're talking about, the matter of Conrad Roy. So we had been asked about this by Representative Poskins, so thank you for that question. What we're looking at here is not like what was happening in Massachusetts. Massachusetts does not have an assisting suicide statute. Massachusetts prosecuted that young woman under their common law involuntary manslaughter offense. So there was no statute at play. There was no assisting suicide language at play. It's completely different. But what we do have is like the Minnesota statute, which was struck down as unconstitutional. These words encouraging, advising, they have no definition. They are so broad that they will incorporate free speech. They will incorporate people who are talking generally about suicide. We might not be comfortable with suicide websites or other sorts of internet forums. But it's not our job to tell people what they can and cannot say, and what they can and cannot think, and what they can and cannot fantasize about. It's their First Amendment protected right to do that. And so this is legally distinct from what happened in Massachusetts, and I think that that's important to note. You'll also see in my written testimony, I included a bill. I hope you get the PDF copy because it includes links to the other states who have assisting suicide bills. So there's only like 12 states that have these bills on the books. And in 6 of them, they have this kind of language, encouraging, advising, etc., things that mention speech. 6 of them do not. In my research, I couldn't find appellate case law upholding or challenging the constitutionality of those statutes. So it just may be that they're not used often in those states. So the only 2 states that we found that had case law about it were California and Minnesota. The California case is from 1992, and the California court held that it wasn't a violation of the First Amendment to have that encouraging and advising language in there. But again, it's important to note that this is only because the California Supreme Court had already interpreted that statute to require affirmative and direct conduct, such as furnishing a weapon or other means by which another could physically and immediately complete suicide. So we're not talking about an instance where it's just speech or it's there has to be conduct attached to it. That was also in a declaratory judgment case. So there was an individual who wished to die by suicide and wanted to have somebody help him. And so they were seeking from the court an injunction that said that wouldn't be against the law. So it wasn't a criminal case. But then more recently in Minnesota in 2014, we analyzed that case in our HB 2488 testimony. I incorporated some of it here. They found that the exact language of advising and encouraging rendered their statute too broad and unconstitutional under the First Amendment. Something else that I believe the proponents raised was that, we need to bring our statute up to date and add these encouraging, advising, these speech things because of the way technology has changed, etc. In preparing for testimony today, I did see that we actually amended our assisting suicide bill in 1998 in House Bill 2531. And prior to 1998, our statute did read that assisting suicide was intentionally advising, encouraging, or assisting another in taking his own life. So I might encourage this committee to dig into that legislative history about why the Kansas legislature has already moved beyond the encouraging and advising language into the statute that we currently have. And then I think sort of maybe in a last point, before I take any questions, if that's appropriate, I believe Representative Titus was asking about, and Mon were asking about definitions, and if we can't define things, it might be too broad. We had suggested also in our testimony that if other courses of conduct, like maybe undue influence or some kind of coercion, if this committee wants to criminalize those, they could put them up in what is already subsection A1 of the bill. We might not need to do a whole new subsection, and this committee would certainly be free to, I think, define those terms. I will say that I couldn't find a pick instruction on undue influence, and it's also not defined anywhere in KSA 21-5111, which is where we define terms commonly used in criminal statutes. So I guess at this time I'll stand for questions if the committee has them.
Okay, thank you. Committee, do we have any questions? Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I want to try to come at this in a couple different ways. So I see in your testimony you have sort of recommendations at the end of it towards language on severity levels and modifications on that. So we have that as one recommendation. And I want to put aside First Amendment concerns for the moment. The other avenue that we're discussing here is the question of encouraging suicide specifically versus that which is done either medically or generally. And I think we all can sort of figure out that there is a difference between them, but trying to define that in statute, define that in language that is clear as to what our intent is something that I think that we're looking at to ensure is inside of a statute. Do you have recommendations as to language to make that intent clear?
Sure. So I can speak a little bit to that. I'll first say that when this body amended the bill in 1998, they were also creating a separate act. And so we found this in our research today as well. It's hidden in the civil code. I'm not totally sure why, but under 60, I think 44.3, there actually is some immunity or defense to liability for healthcare licensed professionals, loved ones, or other authorized people to sort of inform others of their right to maybe withhold life-saving medication. So I think that Kansas does actually provide for that. On the other hand, I don't know that you could define the word encourage to be so narrow that it would not violate the First Amendment. I think that would be a hefty load.
Do we have any other questions? Representative Carmichael, or I'm sorry, Landwehr was first. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And you kind of hit on where I was looking for recommendations. And it appears to me, and again, I'm not an attorney, so I've just been going into these cases as a layperson, is that there seems to be some correlation in language used in other states that coincides with like hazing.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
That coincides with the statutes on the book for hazing and bullying, that they're finding that they're thinking maybe that has a possibility. And then let's see here. This here was one, Counterman v. Colorado. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Okay. In this context, a recklessness standard as showing that a person consciously disregarded substantial and unjustifiable risk that his conduct will cause harm to another.
Right. So Bachner's a criminal threat case that just came out of the United States Supreme Court. Sorry, not. Are you talking about Counterman? Did you say Counterman? Okay. Bachner is our case. I'm sorry. Counterman came out of the U.S. Supreme Court very recently. We have case law in the books in State v. Bachner, which is Kansas Supreme Court case law. It's still good case law right now, that recklessness is not enough for a criminal threat. But we do have a criminal threat statute on the book, which in some ways does criminalize some speech, but I think it is narrowly tailored in such a way that it's not encouraging. So it's not, it would be me threatening, if I'm person A and I say to person B, I'm going to burn your house down. I've just threatened them. I haven't encouraged them to do anything. I haven't said, I'm kind of into arson. I don't know what you might use to do arson. And then I get suggestions on how to commit arson. I think we're talking about two different things there where, one is a direct threat to a person, and the other one is just a general conversation, even if it feels targeted. The encouraging, the advising. You're not saying you're going to do anything. You're not actually doing any sort of conduct. It's just a conversation, and I think that it feels targeted, and obviously it has resulted in people dying. But it's the language of the statute. It's those encourage and those advise. The words are just too broad to criminalize conduct and not just speech.
And I'll just one more question, and then I'd love to visit with you at some point on this, is because looking at some of the things that South Dakota's done and Oklahoma has done, and even Missouri, it's a felony to intentionally in any manner advise, encourage, and I understand there's an issue with encourage, abet or assist another person in taking or attempting to take his or her own life. Is that feasible?
I can't actually speak to that because in all of those states, that language hasn't been challenged in their appellate court. So I don't know if it would rise to the level of speech, but it does seem to fit more in the definition of conduct, like assist. You aid, you abet, you help somebody purchase the materials, you provide them money to purchase the materials. So I think that there are, and I think I even recommended that one of the like the undue influence in this proposed bill, like those are conduct that can be conduct. There are just portions of this bill that could criminalize speech.
Well, I think in Missouri they made theirs was involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, which is the person knowingly incites any person to commit suicide, including through the use of telephone, electronic communications, and such incitement results in the death of each person. So. And I realize that, we look at what's been challenged out there, what's held up, but sometimes you just go into it and hope this never happens again. But if it does, then we see what it does with the courts. Because as I tell people as legislators, we can't always sit here and determine constitution of the law because the people in the black robes across the street are the ones that will make that determination. Thank you.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Ms. Brandt. First, I'm not wearing my hearing aids today, and you cited a civil statute, KSA 60, and I took it down as 444.3, which looks like testimony by a juror. Now, I haven't dug any deeper.
I think it's 604401 et sec. It's in there, but that's where you would find sort of those exemptions from liability for licensed healthcare professionals.
That is the section of articles or of chapter 60 that contains doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals. That makes sense. My second question, Madam Chair. I don't want to give people false hope by passing unconstitutional statutes. I want to pass effective statutes that, as much as we can, help the people who come before this committee. Are there things that we can do, in your from your viewpoint, which might deter the suicide and yet stay within clearly established constitutional principles. And maybe that's what you've suggested to us, but I'd like to kind of hear it from you if I could.
Sure. So based on the language of this statute alone, we had recommended maybe two things. So first, I believe it's new subsection A4 is the undue influence subsection. So we had proposed that it could be undue influence could be moved up to current subsection A1 to read knowingly by force, duress, or undue influence causing another to commit or attempt suicide. I also believe that in the proposed new section A5, it does include the word encourage, but it also includes the word coerce. And I don't have any case law letting me know whether or not coerce includes speech or not. So to the extent that coerce may not criminalize free speech, we would suggest also adding that into section A1, although we're not sure if there's a true difference between coerce and duress.
And Madam Chair, I know I'm asking for a third bite at a 2-bite apple, but moving the section with respect to induce, does that somehow solve the problem regarding a potential void for vagueness type regarding the word induce without a definition?
I can't answer that, but I think it's a prerogative of this committee and this body to define those terms.
Right, I agree.
So,
because I'm afraid it will be subject to attack without a definition, placing the public on notice of what conduct is prohibited and what conduct is permitted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Mon.
Madam Chair, I am curious as to what your response would be to the point that was raised about, sort of a fraudulent monetary claim. So, I call you, say, hey, I have a warrant for your arrest. We can deal with this now if you send me a bunch of debit cards, or prepaid cards. Why is that speech criminalized, but this speech couldn't be?
I guess my response, which won't be a complete response because one, I don't prosecute any crimes. I only defend people who've been convicted of felonies. And I've never seen an appeal from this kind of conviction before. So I should start with that, that I'm not an expert in this area of the law, but I'm not sure what statute that kind of conduct is actually being penalized under.
It'd probably be fraud or some sort.
Right. So I think that that's why maybe it's different. And I know that we have some extra protections for elders or other vulnerable populations when it comes to taking money from them, et cetera. So I can't speak to why. I think fraud is maybe like this specific intent crime where you certain action, like you're still doing some kind of conduct, like you're getting their bank account information, or you're getting some sort of other identifiable information where you're inducing them to send you some kind of product, etc. I think that might be different in the sense that there is some kind of back and forth of conduct going on. And it's not just the speech, but I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. I have another question. Sorry, Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. I am wondering, as you have been looking into all these statutes, have you come across anything that is more narrowly tailored, which may be a moot point when it comes to the First Amendment, but instead of something like advise and encourage, something like the use of psychological pressure, or something that threads the needle between the First Amendment and what this bill is hoping to accomplish?
I would say that possibly if you look at the North Dakota statute, they use additional language like intentionally or knowing aids, abets, facilitates, solicits, incites. They include phrases like deception, coercion, duress, willfully causing the death of others. But I think because, as the proponents have pointed out, sometimes statutes don't keep up with technology, that I'm not sure that any states have addressed that necessarily. I'm flipping through the 12 of them right now. And I don't see any such language in any of them.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you for being here. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, we are finished. I will close the hearing on House Bill 2676 by thanking everyone who came today to help us understand this issue and to put yourselves out there. Thank you. Okay, committee, we will meet Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week. We have a pretty full schedule. In the times when we have any time, we will probably be working bills. I'll try to let you know ahead of time what they will be. I don't anticipate working anything on Monday. So you know that, but then I'll let you know about the rest of the week. And otherwise, everyone have a good weekend and be safe.